Hello, my name is Diane, and today I want to talk about some of the books coming out in November that I'm most looking forward to. Most of these are various subgenres of fantasy. I do have one sci-fi to talk about, and the sci-fi is the only one that's part of a series, a sequel that's coming out. The rest of these are either standalones or first in series. Starting out on November 7th, we have The Darkness Before Them by Matthew Ward. This is the first book in a new trilogy, an epic fantasy trilogy. And the story takes place in a kingdom that is going through some pretty dark times. There's a lot of tension between the different classes. There is magic that could potentially cause problems for the people there. And within this kingdom, we have our main character, Kat, who's really not concerned with any of this. She's concerned about her own problems. She is a thief, and she has this large debt that's really ruined her life up till this point in certain ways, and she is planning her next big score to pay off this debt and finally feel free from it. Unfortunately for her, there is also a rebellion brewing within this kingdom, and with all of these things going on that are going to affect everyone, eventually they're going to catch up to Kat, and she's going to have to choose a side herself. The series sounds really interesting to me. I really like a lot of the things that are within this. I like books with rebellions. I like thief characters. I like a reluctant hero. So this book is very appealing to me. Also coming out on November 7th is The Princess of Thornwood Drive by Kalia Moreau. This book is part contemporary, part fantasy. It follows two sisters named Leanne and Alyssa. In Leanne's half of the story, a year before we meet her, her parents were killed in a car accident that also left her sister Alyssa paralyzed and nonverbal. Leanne has been trying to make ends meet since then, providing care for her sister because she needs full-time care now, and just dealing with everyday problems as well. An adult care center eventually offers to take care of Alyssa for free for Leanne, which is a huge relief for her. However, in Alyssa's half of the story, none of this ever happened. Alyssa's living in a reality where her parents are the king and queen, and a year prior, rather than a car accident, they were attacked and her parents were kidnapped and she was cursed. She has since been living in a secluded place to stay protected. However, there is a dark lord that is after her and her sister now, and Alyssa is preparing for a battle that will not only determine if her and her sister are safe, but if their kingdom is saved as well. I think the story sounds really interesting. Leanne's half of the story is a lot of everyday stress and things that, of course, people deal with in the real world, but she has no idea that Alyssa, on the other half of this, is dealing with completely different problems that she can't even imagine. I'm curious to see how these two halves of the story hopefully eventually come together, and which one stays the reality, or if Alyssa becomes verbal again and returns to Leanne's reality. Also coming out on November 7th is Tonight I Burn by Catherine J. Adams. This is a dark fantasy. In this story, we have our main character, Penny, who is part of the Thorn Coven, which is one of the 5 covens within this world. The members of the Thorn Coven patrol the Veil, which is the barrier between the lands of life and death. Every night, it is the rule that only one witch will be sent through the Veil, and by doing that, they burn her at the stake so she can cross over, and then in the morning, she uses her magic to return. However, one night, one of the sisters passes through, and in the morning she doesn't return. So Penny breaks the rules and secretly burns herself that night so that she can cross through the Veil and find out what happened to her. There, of course, she finds out a lot more than she expected to. She gets involved in the things happening on the other side of the Veil that could not only determine the fate of her sister that she's searching for, but could also affect the magic in the entire world. I've always liked that idea of the Veil being a barrier between the living realm and the spirit realm in fantasy. It's something I've seen before, and it's something I think is really cool. So I think this will be really interesting to see how it's portrayed in the story. It's obviously a big thing how the two halves can potentially affect one another. So I'll be curious to see if Penny can solve the problems and hopefully make it back and save magic from her world. Then moving on to November 14th, we have The Star and the Strange Moon by Constance Sayers. This is a historical fantasy. Half of the story takes place in 1968, where we follow a main character called Gemma, who is an aspiring actress, and up until this point, her career has not been going the way she had hoped. She never really got her big break. She's not really making it the way she wanted to, but she gets offered a role in a horror story that she thinks could be her chance to finally make something of herself in the industry. While she's on set, however, she disappears mysteriously one day, never to be seen again. At least that's how it appears to everyone else. For Gemma, she has been pulled into the film, and everything within the script, including all the monsters, have become her new reality, and she needs to play her part within the movie to hopefully make it to the ending. On the other side of the story, we have in 2007 a man named Christopher, and in his reality, Gemma's disappearance was never solved, and she has become one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries. And once every decade, some new footage that can't be explained how it even exists of Gemma comes to light and is shown. Christopher ends up getting very curious about Gemma's disappearance and sets out to solve it. Unfortunately for him, this could potentially mean that he's also trapped within the mystery forever. This sounds very interesting to me, the idea of getting sucked into a film and trapped there and just hoping that your part in the movie made it till the ending if you play along. And I think it'll be interesting to see how Christopher's side of the story, taking place 40 years later, if he'll have any hope of saving Gemma from this movie or if she's long gone by the time he arrives there, assuming that he goes into the film as well and is potentially trapped just like she was. Also coming out on November 14th is System Collapse by Martha Wells. This is the 7th installment in the Murderbot Diaries series, which is a sci-fi series following a security robot that has hacked itself to be more sentient and not have to follow orders in the way that it's supposed to. And it just wants to escape and live a free life and basically be a hermit and watch dramas all day. But unfortunately, it encounters some humans that it winds up bonding with and eventually forming a team, sort of friendships with these people, and it still feels a responsibility to help. In this particular installment, we're following up right after the events of the last book, Network Effect. There is a planet in trouble, and a corporation has sent rescue ships to it along with additional security units, because they feel like if they can't have the planet for themselves, they're at least going to get those people, those humans that were in the colony there, and add them to their workforce. Murderbot and its crew of humans are trying to find a way to help these people. However, there's something wrong with Murderbot, and it can't figure out what it is, so it needs to figure that out in time to put their plan into action and hopefully save these people. I've really loved this series. I really love the character of Murderbot. I think it's really interesting to have that sort of social recluse that just wants to be left alone and watch its shows all day, but also learns how to form bonds with people and friendships, even though that's not something it ever set out to do. I also just really like the tone of this. There are usually danger and battles within the stories, but the tone is a little bit more lighthearted without being too goofy, and I'm really excited to see what Murderbot gets up to next. Also on November 14th, we have Good Girls Don't Die by Christina Henry. This is a fantasy thriller following 3 women. The first of these women is Celia, and she wakes up in a house that is supposed to be hers with a husband and daughter who are supposed to be hers also, but Celia knows that this is not her life, and she doesn't know how she got there, and no one around her seems to think that this is not her life. Then we have Allie, who on a weekend trip is invited by her friend's boyfriend to go to a remote cabin in the woods, and no one believes her, but Allie knows that something about this trip is very, very wrong. Then we have Maggie, who is just trying to get home to her daughter, but finds herself in a very dangerous situation, and she's not really sure how she got there or who is responsible for her being there. But it's going to take a lot for her to survive it. So we see these 3 women in very different situations where they know that there's something awful happening, or maybe something a little more obvious in the case of Maggie. but see them try and figure out what's going on and how to survive it, whatever it may be. I'm not entirely sure what the fantasy element of this is going to be. I'm assuming it's whatever is responsible for them winding up in these situations, but I'm not really sure where that's going to go, and with only a little bit of information, that's kind of how I like to go into thrillers. I think this is just enough plot information to make these stories sound intriguing, and you want to know what's going on, curious about what's happening to these women and how they're gonna resolve their stories, but not enough that it gives anything away and takes away from whatever that reveal may be. And finally, coming out on November 21st, we have The Ghosts of Beatrice Bird by Louisa Morgan. This is a historical fantasy following our main character, Beatrice Bird, and she is haunted by ghosts. She has been since she was a young girl, except in recent years it's been getting a lot worse. It's a lot more intense, and she's haunted by visions and things that are pushing into her physical reality, and it gets to be a bit too much for her, so she flees her life, her home, her partner, her job, and goes to this remote island inhabited by nuns, and she just tries to keep to herself there. Hopefully getting away from everything will have these visions and hauntings get better, at least a little easier to bear. And while she's there, she meets a woman named Anne who has recently lost everything important to her. Beatrice is trying to find a way to use her powers to help Anne. However, she's realizing that the tone of the ghosts, the feeling of them being around, is getting a lot darker, and there's something really sinister behind it that is coming for them. So Beatrice now has to find a way to figure out what that is and how to stop it. This book sounds pretty creepy, not just because of the ghosts, but just the whole tone of what's happening in the story of that something dark is coming for her and she doesn't know what it is. And she's also put herself in a position in trying to alleviate what's going on with her, where she is not around anything familiar or anyone familiar with what's going on with her, and she has less tools at her disposal to deal with it. Maybe the nuns will step in, or Anne will have something up her sleeve. Who knows how Beatrice is going to figure this out and hopefully solve her ghost problem, but it sounds like it'll be a very interesting ride. So those are all 7 of the books that I'm looking forward to in November. Let me know if you're anticipating any of these, or if there's something I didn't mention that you're really looking forward to coming out next month. I'd love to hear about it. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.